So let's talk a little bit about what challenges you all have faced in making that happen, right? Because I think all of us in our jobs have faced certain challenges with, as Arianna pointed to, which is like sometimes there's stereotype around lawyers. Like at our company, a lot of our workforce is very young. They've never worked with lawyers, so they have like no actual practical knowledge of what that looks like. They just have an impression. So how do you, like, what challenges have you faced and how do you overcome them? Who wants to go first?
I could kick it off, I think.
Go for it.
So I think, you raised such a good point, Lydia, that it's about that dialogue. And I think that opening that dialogue is what creates the strongest agreement at the end of the day. And it is difficult because also, especially depending on the environment that you're in, but, very typical within an in-house environment, is you're working across many different categories of business. You're dealing with employees who have an expertise in many different areas. And you just sort of want to, again, point out the value and the tangible value that you can provide so that they're able to see that. I think it's definitely difficult. When we think of, difficulties that I've faced, again, I'm very fortunate to be a part of a company that really values their legal, really tries to encourage their legal to participate as much as possible on the business end, to collaborate with their business teams and, include if I have a thought as to how I think a contract would be better off being structured a certain way, my company absolutely encourages me to speak up and share those thoughts. And I think having an environment like that really helps to foster another environment that creates a comfort with the lawyers, that creates more of a collaboration. It creates it creates an environment where people feel a little bit more comfortable sharing their ideas across all platforms. Some difficulties that I can think of is, the business team has a timeline and they have a goal. And I often want to remind my business teams I have the same goals that they do. One of the things that we could sort of, where our processes contradict each other a little bit is I might have a business team that has, the skeleton of aligned business terms, and they want me to get started on drafting and maybe negotiating the agreement. And one of the things that we've found to be a nice process for us as a company is we want to make sure that we have finalized alignment on those business terms before we start getting into the drafting and negotiations. Oftentimes, that might be met with some resistance. The business team wants to get the ball rolling. They want things to get going. And I find that after you establish that relationship that we talked about a little while ago, the business team is a little more open and understanding to why you are saying we want to take a step back and handle it in a little bit more of a concrete, processed way. And I've explained that I actually think it leads to a weaker negotiation and a more difficult time finding that common ground with a counterparty if you don't have solidified business terms at the outset. So I find that after a few experiences like that and, building that trust and that relationship with my business teams, they're able to see the benefit in having those solidified business terms. And even if it slows things down a little bit at the beginning, it ends up in a more productive and a more successful deal at the end of the day. So I think managing the relationships with, competing priorities and sort of letting everyone know where I'm coming from and how I think it will benefit the team overall, I think has really helped me overcome those hurdles. But it definitely is something that's difficult when you have a timeline and you have, business folks who want to make sure a deal gets done. We sort of want them to know we're partners. We share the same goal, but that there might be certain things that help the whole thing go a little bit smoother.
I can add to that, Arianna, because I think relationship is a really strong component of establishing a very good reputation for the legal department. I faced it firsthand when I was working in-house, because obviously I was the first counsel in my last experience. I was the first and sole counsel entering the company. So they never worked with a lawyer before. So really, they really didn't know what to expect, right? But the few who had, and I guess my previous experience is really the legal teams were more positioned as a cost center. So that's kind of something that I really figured from a very junior stage of my career, that, okay, there is an issue, generally speaking, with the way the legal departments are perceived. So I guess whether in my last experience or even the ones before that, I've kind of always tried to build those relationships and try to understand what the end goals were, for basically whatever they want to achieve, and how as an in-house lawyer I can help them achieving those goals. So understanding obviously the audience, the end user is paramount in order to establish trust and relationship. And I think so that would be number one. Number two would also be initiatives. So what are the things as an in-house legal team that you can do to facilitate whatever goals they are targeting? Again, if you have a sales department who wants to close 2 times faster, what are the things that you can facilitate at the contracting level to enable them to do that? And again, how do you communicate what you are doing in order to help them more proactively? So I guess understanding the goals, talking to your people, building those relationships really matter. Something else that I've done that really worked well was obviously leveraging those very underrated scenarios, in particular trainings. Trainings are so underrated. Like, we all just show up with ugly and boring PowerPoints, where really that's the occasion where we connect with our audience. We can talk to them. We can really transform the way we engage with our customers internally. And yet I think this is not necessarily enough leverage. So what I did, I've tried to implement audience engagement tools, and obviously those who follow me on LinkedIn would know that I love visuals, and I always try to visualize legal information. And so I've created all sorts of infographic to facilitate the understanding of commercial contracts and all of those things. And what I found is that it's really created, obviously, not only a relationship of trust, but also it kind of facilitated the people would come to us a lot more often for contract-related questions or privacy-related questions, because they went to an engaging training, or they saw the infographic and it kind of prompts some questions for them. So so I would say don't underestimate the power of those little things that you can implement on a daily basis that don't cost anything. You don't have to be loaded with resources to make them happen. Just be creative, and of course, understand your clients internally and help them achieve whatever they have in mind.
Sarah, I love that you mentioned the presentation, and I think having those. I think a presentation is such an amazing way to introduce your company or your overall team, or have them become a little bit more familiar with the benefits of legal and everything that legal can do. And I know, Lydia, you mentioned this a little bit earlier as well, but it's also important to think about your audience. So, we're attorneys, but so we want to think about, when you make those presentations, you can visualize that data or that information in different ways. You can make graphs, you can use numbers, and there are many people who don't respond well to words. They like to see information in numbers set out in a graph. And so that's another way of passing along that information. And I also think that presentation, Sarah, like you mentioned, if you add some color to it and you add some personality to it, again, remind people we're humans, you become more approachable. And I think your legal team as a whole becomes more approachable, and people can see a little bit more of what you can offer them.
Yeah, I agree. I echo what Sarah and Arianna said. At Bowery, we have an intro to legal presentation. It's actually intro to legal and equity. So people are really interested in understanding the equity part of their compensation. So that's how we hook them. And we have them periodically for all new hires. And the first part of the presentation is literally like our small legal team's face, like every single one of us plastered on there to say, look, this is what we look like, big smiles, we're normal, we're human, get to know us, but this is how we add value and this is how we contribute to the company. And we go beyond just contracts. We talk about, legal's involvement with regulatory advice. We talk about, any external reputational questions that the company might be dealing with. We talk about real estate. We talk about intellectual property. We talk about the potential for disputes, all these different aspects of lawyering that, a regular business person might not think about, and how their specific function could interact with ours. Sometimes when I give the presentation, I actually spell it out and cater it to the audience. So I'll say, hey, John Smith, you're a software engineer. This is the kind of work you do. And this is how some of that work overlaps with the work I do. Let's make sure if something like this happens, you loop me or, my colleagues in. The other piece of it, Lydia, you were asking about challenges. I will say one thing that's sort of been specific to us, we're we're growing really fast, and we have a ton of people who are joining, and not all of them might come from work cultures where legal has been a thought partner from day one. So one of the challenges we've had is sort of bringing people into the Bowery way of doing things and the Bowery way of lawyering. So sometimes it's a difficult conversation after something's happened where legal wasn't looped in to tell them, actually, it would have been better or more effective if we had been brought in on the earlier side. These are the ways that we would have advised you differently. Please keep this in mind going forward. And that education, it takes a few iterations to get people to understand, where we should be brought along. And I don't know how sustainable this is. We're still, relatively small, so we can do that. But, especially for those who are part of small legal teams, I will say having those kind of periodic check-ins and trainings is a helpful way to kind of remind people that it's not just contracts, or it's not just regulatory advice. There's all these different things that legal can be relied on and should be relied on for help.
I think that's such a great point. One of the beautiful and special things about a legal department is it's unique in that way, that we really touch almost every aspect of the business, which is, unique to other departments. So I think, Ramya, your point in just, broadening the scope of really everything that we do have our eyes on to make the business overall run more smoothly will, comfort the teams and make them feel more comfortable coming to us with any sort of issue.